The Dakota is one of the most iconic and mysterious buildings in New York City. Built in 1884, the stunning red brick edifice sits on the corner of 72nd Street and Central Park West, overlooking the expansive greenery of the park. It's an architectural marvel with towering turrets, ornate carvings, and a grand, sweeping staircase. The Dakota has been the home to many famous residents, including Lauren Bacall, Judy Garland, and John Lennon. But it's also known for something darker, the legend of the Crying Lady. The Crying Lady is said to be the ghost of a woman who lived in the Dakota many years ago. According to legend, she was a beautiful and wealthy woman who lived in one of the apartments on the upper floors. She was married to a wealthy businessman who was often away on business, leaving her alone in the apartment for long periods of time. Over time, she grew increasingly lonely and isolated and began to suffer from a severe depression. One day, she decided that she couldn't take it anymore and threw herself out of the window of her apartment, falling to her death on the pavement below. Her husband was devastated by her suicide and was said to have never fully recovered from the tragedy. It wasn't long after her death that strange things began to happen in the Dakota. Residents reported hearing strange sounds, like the sound of someone crying, coming from the upper floors. Some claimed to have seen the ghostly figure of a woman wandering the halls, her face contorted in grief. Over time, the legend of the Crying Lady grew, and her story became one of the most famous ghost stories in New York City. As someone who had always been interested in the paranormal, I was fascinated by the legend of the Crying Lady. I had lived in New York City for several years and had heard the stories about the Dakota, but I had never experienced anything firsthand. That all changed one night when I was invited to a party in one of the Dakota's apartments. The apartment belonged to a friend of a friend, and I was excited to have the chance to explore the building and perhaps catch a glimpse of the Crying Lady. As soon as I stepped off the elevator onto the apartment floor, I felt a strange sensation. It was as if the air was heavy with a sense of sadness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The party was in full swing, and I spent most of the evening mingling with other guests and trying to catch a glimpse of the infamous ghost. As the night wore on, I began to feel more and more uneasy. The sounds of the party seemed to fade away, and I found myself drawn to a corner of the apartment where a large window looked out onto Central Park. As I stood there, staring out into the darkness, I suddenly heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of someone crying, coming from somewhere deep within the apartment. At first, I thought it was just a guest who had had too much to drink. But as the sound grew louder, I realized that it was something far more sinister. I turned to the others in the room, but nobody else seemed to hear the crying. They continued to talk and laugh, oblivious to the ghostly presence in the room. I began to feel as if I was going mad, but then I saw her, the Crying Lady. She was standing in the corner of the room, her face contorted in grief. She wore a long, flowing dress that seemed to shimmer in the dim light, and her hair was long and dark, cascading down her back like a waterfall. I could see right through her, but she seemed so real that I felt as if I could reach out and touch her. I stood frozen, staring at the ghostly figure in front of me. The other guests continued to ignore her, as if she wasn't even there, but I knew what I was seeing, and I was filled with a sense of terror and wonder. As I continued to watch, the Crying Lady slowly turned and began to walk towards the door of the apartment. I knew that I had to follow her, that I had to find out what she wanted. I pushed my way through the crowd of partygoers and followed her out into the hallway. The hallway was empty, but I could still hear the sound of her crying, coming from somewhere further down the hall. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest, until I reached the end of the hallway. There, in front of me, was an open window. I could feel the cold night air blowing in, and I could see the lights of the city below. But there was nobody there. Nobody but the ghostly figure of the crying lady standing on the edge of the window ledge. I could feel her pain and her sorrow, her desperation and her loneliness. I knew that she had jumped from this very window all those years ago, and that she was still trapped here, unable to find peace. I reached out to her, calling her name, telling her that it was okay, that she could let go. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the crying lady was gone. The hallway was silent, and the only sound was the distant hum of the city below. I stood there for a few moments, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I knew that I had experienced something truly extraordinary, something that I would never forget. And I knew that the legend of the crying lady in the Dakota was more than just a ghost story. It was a tragedy, a tale of love and loss, and a reminder that sometimes the past is never truly gone. In the years since that night, I have never forgotten the crying lady and the experience I had in the Dakota. I have come to believe that there are things in this world that we cannot explain, that there are forces at work that are beyond our understanding. And I know that the legend of the crying lady will continue to haunt the Dakota, a testament to the power of the human spirit, even in death.